Okay, and welcome to another episode of what is now being called EPiServer Developer Weekly instead of our Ektron office hours. More or less the same thing, still going to be talking about Ektron and, as well as EPiServer, and this is part of that. So today we're going to be talking about third-party authentication. We'll cover it in general, but have some Ektron-specific code to share as well, and all of the guys have Ektron stories, whether good or bad. We'll find out. And so I'm James Stout. I am a technical evangelist for the new EPiServer, formerly Ektron. And with me is a cadre of experienced Ektron experts. And David, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Hi there, my name is David Artemick. I'm a senior technology consultant with Celerity, an Ektron partner, and I've been working with Ektron for 5-6 years, maybe even more now.
At least five, because I know we worked together for a while.
I'm trying to think, it's been too long.
It's been over 5 years for me, so it's definitely over 5 for you.
Or maybe 7.
And Jay.
Jay Burling, I'm the Director of Web Application Development at Hendrix College. We've been using Ektron for 10 years.
And we really appreciate that. So Hendrix College has won some awards for the website, including from Ektron. Yep, right back there, Jay. And they were one of the first fully responsive design sites built on Ektron. So very happy for that as well. And you guys are going through a redesign fairly soon.
We're working on a major redesign, which will be rolling out in phases probably over the next year.
So happy to talk more about that with you whenever the opportunity arises. And Ken McAndrew.
Yeah, I'm Ken McAndrew. I'm a senior technology consultant with Celerity. I'm like Dave. I've been working with Ektron about, 4 years now, I think, something like that. So.
Yeah, you're a little over 4, almost 5 now, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. It was before I made the official switch to C-SPAN and then got here. So it's been a while. We can't remember anymore. It's been too long.
Well, I know you're trying to repress that C-SPAN experience, I'm sure.
I'm not trying to repress the C-SPAN experience. It was fine. In case anybody's actually watching, which I doubt. From C-SPAN, I mean.
You guys did some really cool stuff at C-SPAN. Presented at Synergy on the custom UI you built for authors, etc. It's really advanced work that you guys did, so it was impressive. A lot of scheduling, etc.
Had to make up for what it couldn't do.
Well, you know, it's why you want an extensible platform, one that you can modify and build on top of. We're never going to cover every use case. And Kenny.
Hi, Kenny Gutierrez. I'm with Behringer. We're a Ektron customer. We've been using it for probably about 7 years now. Also
award winners.
Yes.
But you don't have the trophy behind you.
I tend to not carry him with me.
You got to step it up, Kenny. Jay has his behind him. You guys.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were we supposed to get our trophies out?
You need a mantle, is what it is. You got to have a mantle place to put it on behind you. Yeah.
Oh.
Right next to your Infinity Gauntlet.
Next, where it should
This is
be.
home every night.
Right. Yeah. So great, and I think Kenny, you're the only one not experiencing freezing weather at the moment.
Actually, it snowed this morning, and the sun's out now, and it's all going away.
You guys had snow this morning.
We did.
That's ridiculous, Kenny. I'm sorry to hear it.
Schools were actually closed the last 2 days. You know.
Wow.
A little bit of ice, and everybody freaks.
That just shows that I need to ask the hard questions right before we come on, so that I know.
Kenny's been sending that weather
I
up there.
embarrass myself. So, third-party authentication, it's something that comes up in, I'd say, at least half of the implementations that I've worked on. David, Ken, you guys have any idea? What would you just guesstimate gut reaction on percentage of projects you guys work on that do have some form of third-party authentication?
All of them.
All of them? Yeah.
At least the ones, the couple I've worked on have all had third party. I think probably it's about 50-50. Thinking about some of the other ones I've just touched on, but not fully implemented.
Yeah, well, when you've got almost 4,000 customers, as the former Ektron had. It's obviously a lot more with the combined organization. That works out to quite a number of projects that have to have third-party authentication. And we had a webinar. We still have a webinar. It's on the ektron.com website for third-party authentication, but that webinar was done several years ago, and a lot of the APIs are out of date. So I've had a couple of requests recently to provide sample code. And you know me, I don't like to provide sample code to one person. When I write it, I like to put it out where anybody can access it. So if you go to my GitHub page, which is just eGandalf is my GitHub account, you'll find a couple of authentication samples there. One is third-party auth, which actually contains two samples within it, one that authenticates against Twitter and one that's just a more simplified outline of the process, as well as the two-factor authentication project is out there as well from a couple of weeks ago whenever we did that episode. So before we jump into the sample and the demo, I'd like to just get a little bit of coverage for where you guys have seen third-party authentication, what the need is for it. So what's the driver for doing third-party authentication for you? And I'll go to Jay.
We have some separate piles of users with different levels of access that we needed to give. We didn't want to give everybody CMS user accounts just because that's unmanageable and it makes it harder for them to understand what's happening on the page, even if you lock the permissions down. So we've locked our CMS users to specifically just our faculty and staff. But even among the rest of our portal users that we've got out there, we've got students who generally have a little bit more information, and then their parents who have less. The students all already have Active Directory accounts, and we didn't want to give them another login to memorize. So we set up our third-party authentication to utilize our Active Directory for that pile of membership users, where their parents and other people that are connected to the college but aren't necessarily students use the standard SQL membership users.
Right, and it's an interesting division. And we were talking a little bit before. I would like to understand the logic that you're using to separate, because I assume it's the same login form for everybody on the front end.
Yep. It's kind of a complex logic path we built, but it's basically built around the fact that we know who they are, we know the username that they're utilizing, and we have a role-based system that we've built that uses a couple different, some complex code, but we know their roles and what they should have access to, and we know information about them based on who they are in our systems to determine which type of which user store to authenticate them against. But to them, it's completely transparent. They type their stuff in the box and it works.
Which is as it should be. It should be transparent to the user logging in, unless you're doing a sign-in via Twitter or Facebook or something like that. Then it should just be one login form, and let them. They don't need to know whether they're signing in via Active Directory or via SQL. It's just complication. And Kenny, what's your use case for third-party auth?
We've got I guess you'd call it extranet site, our security site, where we've got broker-dealers who have third-party IDs that need to log in. And at the same time, we've also got due diligence users coming to the same site who don't have these third-party IDs. So we're kind of determining which kind of group you're in, overriding the on-authenticate method of the control. We're inheriting from the basic Windows login control, and then doing some custom logic there, opening a web request and posting in the payload to the third party, looking in the XML response that comes back, seeing if it's a good login or not, then doing some logic to populate user groups for certain documentation they need to see, and then kind of dropping them into the site.
So have you any of you done a batch import of users and worked at it that way, where you're doing like a nightly import or something with system? So David, I see you're nodding. So
Yeah.
or Jay, whoever
We
wants to
synchronize all of our user accounts. We use the role systems, the group system in Ektron, to do portal access level stuff. And so our accounts are created in Ektron and given memberships based on information in our systems through a web service. Should have been third. It should have been a 3-tier, but I wrote it before that. So.
Well, there's always the redesign, right? And David, how had you handled importing users?
We wrote a scheduling console application that we set up for running on a regular interval every, I think, night to pull down any users that weren't in the system and also update their some custom properties and some other data associated with them from another system for the project. So we actually have the application, the console application, scheduled through Windows Task Manager, and it calls a custom web service that we've put on the system, the server, to call the other services and pull the users down and then run through it.
Yeah. I've had it set up where it's the outside application who's making a push into Ektron as well, but using web services inside of the site. It always seems much more complicated if you're tying the groups to that external system as well. There's just a lot more logic that has to go into it because you have to pass over group membership information and do a lot more updates. All right, so I think there are just so many different ways to do the authentication, but on the Ektron side, the API side, it pretty much amounts to the same things. You have to have a proxy user account, whether it's a CMS user or a membership user. You have to have some user account inside of Ektron or inside of whatever system you're authenticating against. It works the same way whether you're authenticating against a CMS or an LMS or whatever. Whatever you're signing into. So let me jump over to the sample. I'm showing my entire screen, so if any embarrassing messages pop up, just ignore it. Don't let me know. So I do have two samples. As I said, those are on my GitHub account. It's just github.com/eGandalf. So there's absolutely nothing inside my eGandalf.com that is relevant, but I've got several things here, so an auto tagger, but we're going to be looking at the Ektron third-party authentication. And I'm actually starting with a completely empty site. Jay, did you have something?
I was just going to say the share buttons are awesome.
Oh, yeah? I'm glad you like them. I can explain where that came from if we've got time, but that's what we're using on Ektron.com right now, and ended up being much more efficient to just do my own thing. Not easier by far, but more efficient. So the third-party authentication project is what we're looking at today, and it just has 4 files in it. I started out building a third-party authentication, and this is why it's called third-party auth and simple third-party auth. I started out doing the authentication with Twitter, and then as I got into it, I realized that with all of the OAuth requests and everything, it was way too complicated just for somebody who wanted to get the point, the general process. So I've got a simple third-party auth for that as well. So starting with the simple, and I'll show you the code for this. So it's pretty basic stuff. A login form with a username, password field, and a button. I'm not doing any validation on this right now, and it's actually not even validating against any other system at the moment. So let me collapse some of these and show you. So this is attempting a login. And the authentication class is just going to say if it's not empty, return true. That's all it's doing. So I can literally, in this sample, enter any values, and it's going to say, sure, why not? So this is my authentication class, just has a return true. So if you were building this class, this authentication class would be where you would put your SQL logic or Active Directory logic, or I've even had authentication information coming from a reverse proxy via HTTP headers that are added to the request by that proxy. So a lot of different ways that you can process this, but this is where you would actually process the username and password to authenticate it. And then Ektron is just going to trust whatever you return here as true or false. All right. I'm collapsing things I don't need to collapse. So just to walk through the process a little bit here, get my authentication class, which is going to just return true for anything. And that's the call for that method right there. If it is authenticated, I'm calling creating an instance of my third-party user manager class, which is here, and this is where my Ektron logic for attempting to log the user in and creating the user if they don't exist in the system. So that's inside that class. So I'm going to attempt the proxy user login, and I'm passing in two values with this. It's the authentication system ID, and I'm just using their username. Now, I want to go into why those are important. So when you're authenticating against some external system, you want to assign that system some long value ID. And it doesn't matter what it is. It's just an arbitrary value as long as it's different from all of the other systems that you're authenticating against. So authenticating it using Ektron SQL users, it's system ID 0. Whatever else you build, you can use any other value for that. If you're using Active Directory integration built into Ektron, then it has its own assigned value, and you can just pop into the database and see what those are. So that is the system type ID and then the user ID that gets assigned to it. So I'm assuming that the username with this third-party system is not ever going to change. When I'm looking at the Twitter login, I actually don't use their Twitter screen name because I can go and change my eGandalf Twitter screen name to something else, but it doesn't change my Twitter ID. So you want to make sure that that is an immutable value, something that's not going to change over time. So I'm going to pass the system ID and the username, and it's going to return whether that's successful or not. And I can pop into that method. I tried to leave it a lot of comments, but this login method that accepts the system ID and the username is actually the only Ektron API method that can log in a user without the password. So you have to have the system ID and the username correct. All right, so attempt to log them in. If it's not successful, so if that failed, then I want to, this code, this logic is just going to automatically create the user. You can redirect them to a registration page or whatever you want to do here. I'm just going to automatically create that user anytime. So when I create that user, I have to set the authentication system ID and the authentication user ID for that new membership user. We also have a method for get random password for default regex. We do not want to store the password for that third-party system inside of the proxy user. We want to just generate something random that is never going to be used. Just so you know, if you just generate a GUID or something like that, then it has to pass the regular expression validation on the password. So if you generate a GUID and it doesn't pass the default regex, then it's going to throw an error on creating that user. That's why we have that method. So once we create the user, if that's successful, then we're going to try to log that user in once created. Once the user is logged in, do a response redirect, which clears all of the post-back information and sets the cookie correctly. So that's the process for it. And I can just type in whatever values I want here, and it's going to create that user. Of course, it's probably gone to sleep the time that we've been talking. So is that the general process that you guys have followed? Any differences?
It's basically the same thing that we're doing.
Yeah.
We did some way more complex stuff because we couldn't. When we built it, that the third-party authentication stuff wasn't working properly. but that was many years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I think with us when we did it, it was like it wouldn't. It didn't want to behave right. I mean, and the documentation wasn't the clearest on it, like what you just went through. So we ended up doing with one client, we're using Active Directory and custom code to do the Active Directory login, but also because we're using LDAP to bring them into the CMS, that was treating them all as CMS users. But because we're using Page Builder, if we logged them in that way, they'd all see the Page Builder bar, and we couldn't have that. So they actually had dummy membership accounts. So the credentials were authenticated against AD, but then they were logged into Ektron through these dummy accounts. And that's probably one thing in any kind of user consideration is in terms of using a CMS user versus a membership user. If you're going to have people as CMS users, you got to remember those toolbars could appear on standard pages. I know you can hide them, but on page builder pages, those toolbars will come back, and if you try to check the hide toolbar button, you're only going to hide the new toolbar. The old toolbar will still appear. James has an error.
Yeah. What's that?
You have an error.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I didn't test this one. I did test the Twitter one before.
Hey, at least this proves the live demo.
Yeah, it is a live demo.
It's the most important thing about live demos is breaking.
Fix that later. I mean, this is a brand new min site, and obviously have a permission error.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there. It's not a big deal, but I literally just pulled these files down from my GitHub. So I'm on a brand new laptop too, which doesn't help.
Ooh.
So this, I just set myself up for this failure, but that's okay. I can show the Twitter integration. It's exactly the same process under the hood as the simple example. It just requires a lot more code because I have to make a lot of different requests to Twitter's APIs to get through OAuth and redirect the user over to Twitter so that they can authorize the app to be able to read their tweets and stuff. But I have a read-only application set up inside of Twitter, and you can go to, I think it's dev.twitter.com, sign up for your account. There's my current consumer key and consumer secret if anybody wants to write it real fast, because I'm going to reset it after this demo. But it's just a lot more code. I tried to put comments throughout this as well, and it explains each of the OAuth requests that I had to go through. I would absolutely recommend not doing it this way. Go to NuGet and get the Twitter package there. So don't write all of this OAuth, but it's there if you want it. And I set out to do it the hard way and did it the hard way. But it's exactly the same logic underneath the hood. Is attempt to authorize the user. If it comes back and they've granted authorization, then it's going to go ahead and log them in. But it has to run that process through Twitter before it runs the CMS login. One thing I'm doing here is wherever that is, let me do a search here. Of course, the word authenticate is going to come up quite a bit, so let me try .authenticate. It's not going to find it. Okay. Somewhere in here, I'm pretty sure I'm running a .authenticate on the user CRUD. So I can at least show it to you here. There's a .authenticate method that will just tell you if the username and password is correct without actually logging them in. Not sure if you actually need to do that though with this. Actually, no, I'm not doing it here. That was my mistake. But it's the same process as in the simple third-party auth, as I said, and this one actually should work. So I can actually sign in via Twitter. You should be able to see it redirect. So it redirects to Twitter. I've already given it authorization, so it's just redirecting back. And when I go into the settings, it's going to show a less login time for that user. It should be just now. more proof that it's a live demo, because in a recorded demo I'd cut all of that time out. So my last login time, 2:25, so just a minute ago. And setting the username to @eGandalf, but the authentication user ID that gets set behind the scenes is actually the Twitter user ID, not the screen name. So it doesn't say eGandalf for that. All right. And any questions? Any feedback on that set of code? Does it look monstrous? It feels monstrous.
Well, that's just all the commenting, but I mean, it's a complex process when you're trying to determine which user to use for which authentication system. But I'm going to go in through your code and probably try to optimize mine now, so it definitely looks good.
Yeah, I'm not saying mine is optimal. It's just designed to highlight the process. That you have to have that authentication type ID for each of your proxy users inside of Ektron in order to know which system you're authenticating against. Otherwise, it's not going to work, because you could have two J Burlings in different systems. Jay, for you, for example, you could have a J Burling student, you could have a J Burling parent, and they're authenticating against different systems. So how do you make that differentiation?
Yeah, that's complicated. But we unite them all into one piece. Our goal was to have the user exist and then to append roles onto the user. So that's kind of the model of how ours functions. And then you've got kind of your, if you propagate all the way up to CMS user, then you have those special permissions as well. So it's complicated.
Now that regex piece, that's somewhat of a new addition, right? Because we didn't have that initially, and I think we did an upgrade, and all of a sudden had to dig in and find out why it wasn't creating new accounts, because the password wasn't passing the regex test.
Right. Not sure exactly when that was introduced. I'm thinking it was 8.6 or 8.7 that the generate password was introduced.
I actually remember reading about that, because I had never used that either until recently. I hadn't even seen it.
So let me share, because you guys mentioned the buttons. I can share the history behind that. I wrote that bit of JavaScript when I was developing Ektron.com, and if you see the share buttons for all of our blogs, right? And where we did an infinite scroll, it just keeps adding share buttons. So we were originally going to use the default share buttons provided by Twitter and Facebook, etc. And when you have several of those on the page, especially when you have to update the page with more share buttons, it actually reinitializes the LinkedIn or Facebook code that you have to embed, forces it to reinitialize every button on the page. Yeah. So you can't just load a share button, like a Facebook like button or something, and just initialize those 10 buttons that you loaded. It reinitializes every one of them. And so I wrote my own JavaScript to do all of the shares, and it only initializes what it needs to initialize. It was killing my browser. It was killing Firefox and Chrome, not just IE, because it had to reinitialize potentially hundreds of buttons on the page, depending on how far down you scroll. So that's where that social share button came from.
Hey, James.
Yes.
Two things. One, you've got a comment on Twitter, and two, I got a jet.
Okay. See you, Ken.
See you.
I know you've got a meeting.
Yep.
So yeah, Hans is asking, think this is possible for CAS or Shibboleth? Hans, I don't know what either of those are.
I do.
Okay, Jay, go for it.
Those are single sign-on authentication pieces that use SAML. Theoretically, you could do it in the same way. You'd have to create the code for reading the certificates and making sure that you tie the user back together. I know that some people have talked about setting up some SAML authentication stuff for Ektron, and it's kind of floating around the Twitter dev community for a little bit. I know someone out there did it. I just can't remember off the top of my head who it was.
We have several clients who've done it that I can't name, or at least I don't know that I can name, so I'm going to play it safe. We that have done SAML integration for authentication. we do have several clients that have done it. So if that is the underlying tech, then absolutely yes, you can do it. I haven't done it personally, so I don't know how the process differs. Yep. So hopefully, Hans, that answers your question, and what Jay said, I hope gives you a little bit more direction than what I could provide. But it's out there. I would recommend just doing a Google search. That would be the best thing I could provide. You can also talk to your account manager, or if you're working for a partner. I don't know who you're working for. Let me check your Twitter profile real quick. It says Jacksonville, so just your location. It's not much for me to go by, but talk to your account manager, or if you're a partner, talk to one of our account executives who should be helping manage your partnership, and we can definitely hook you up with some examples, some case studies around SAML integration with Ektron. Okay. Any other comments, guys, before we sign off?
It's a really deep topic, and any implementation is necessarily going to be really specific to the use case. But there's a lot of people out there that apparently have done it, so reach out. We're out here.
Yep, definitely reach out. Jump onto the forums, starting asking questions there. Let us know where you're running into problems, and we can try to help troubleshoot it for you. Help make sure you can achieve your goal with that authentication schema. And with that, we're a couple minutes over, so I'm going to stop the broadcast. It's always a pleasure to have all of you on. Ken as well, even though he's not on, we'll say it's a pleasure to have him on. And David, Jay, Kenny, thanks for joining. And I'm not sure when we're going to have the next episode right now. It's very possible we'll have one coming from Europe next week, but I'm not going to call it likely right now. It's just been a conversation topic between Alan, who was on last week, and I. And I'm trying to convince Alan to start hosting some on his own so that we can actually do more of these. But we're looking at doing some more EPiServer-focused episodes as well as some more Ektron-focused episodes. Always happy to have suggestions for topics, so if we're not covering something that you would like to see us cover, or if you'd like to see a piece of sample code that I can put together in my spare time, as much of that as I have, then feel free to comment on Twitter or shoot me an email at james.stout@episerver.com. David's holding up a finger.
One thing, the password regex stuff that you pointed out in the code, I know there's a reference to it in the 9.1 manual, underneath setting up Ektron and managing your users and passwords or logins and passwords, something like that. I don't know that it's documented well past 9. So if somebody has questions about that or is looking at it and they don't want to post but they want to read the documentation, they can go into the manual and read it for 9.1. I also have a link to it on my blog that I wrote about securing Ektron in the Experts Corner. So
awesome.
Link to that stuff there. So
yeah, I'll definitely jump on and share out that blog post because that's very important stuff. So yeah, with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. We're 4 minutes because I've rambled now, and we'll see you guys next time, whenever that is, and there will be an email coming out and a lot of tweets about it as well. So just keep an eye out, and we'll cover another topic next time. Thanks.